Push the button. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for December 2nd, 2019. We're at the Emergency Operations Center here, if you want to care to join us. And of course, we're going to start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all. All right, Director, roll call.
All right, roll call. Commissioner Moore.
Present.
Commissioner Fong.
Present.
Commissioner Takahashi.
Here.
Chairperson Wong.
Here.
Vice Chair Saxena is absent.
Okay. First item on the agenda, approval of minutes. We've got the draft minutes of November 12th, and the recommendation action, of course, is to approve the draft minutes. So, anybody make a recommendation? All right, well, I will make a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all right. So we're going to do a voice vote, as we don't have anything here. So for all those in favor of approving the minutes, aye.
Aye.
All those that disapprove, and all those that are abstaining.
I abstain.
I abstain as well.
Okay, so motion carries 2-02.
And
Actually,
to confirm, I think, Ms. Moore, you're abstaining from just a portion of the minutes that you did not participate in.
Correct. I recused myself on 2 items.
And then would you be approving the remainder of the minutes?
Yes.
So as for those 2 items, we would have 2 votes, which staff will just confirm that that's the consensus of the people who were present at that meeting.
Yep.
Actually,
was
those
the
are
vice chair present?
Vice Chair was present at the meeting.
Well, then what I might recommend is that we wait until
He comes back and then we bring this back
and
to the
then
agenda?
We have a full 3 votes.
Let's do that then.
To approve that.
Okay, so let's rescind the approval of the minutes.
Or of those 2 items, I suppose, what Ms. Moore was recused from.
Okay, yeah, that would work too. Okay. Item 2, we have the study session regarding the proposed policy document for the City of Cupertino Code of Ethics and Ethics Protocol.
Chair, yeah,
So we should
have
do
the
oral. We haven't done
communication
oral,
first.
actually. We should do oral. Sorry about that. Apologies. New environment. We're going to do oral communications. And if you've got something you want to say to the city, please pick a blue card. It is now in the back of the room, I believe, and bring it up. So if you've got 3 minutes to talk and come up to, I don't know, where would they speak? Come up to the speaker over there. So anyone have anything to say? Okay, I guess no oral communications. Any written communications that we should share?
None.
Okay. I don't see anything on a consent calendar, I believe. Is that correct? Okay. Item number 2. Study session regarding the proposed policy document for the City of Cupertino Ethics, Code of Ethics and Ethics Protocol. Recommendation to action, review the policy to provide any input. Let's start with the staff report.
That's correct. We don't have a presentation. A staff report is attached to your to the agenda and your packet tonight. My name is Ben Fu, Director of Community Development. At this particular item, we're seeking Commission's input. What I would recommend is if you can come to a consensus of a number of items so that we can communicate back to the City Council for Council's consideration, that'd be the most helpful. So with that, I leave it up to you, Chair.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm assuming that everybody on the commission here has had a chance to look at the City of Cupertino Ethics Protocol. I don't know if there's any opening conversations or discussion points that people want to start with. For those following online and video, this is the draft ethics protocol that's being passed through to all the commissions at the moment, and this is the input that's going to City Council. If memory serves me right, this looks 98% similar to the City of Palo Alto Ethics Protocol, so I'll start with that. Commissioner Fong?
I've got a couple comments. The first one is that under point J, the final point here, positive workplace environment, there's a unusual There's an unusual line in there. City elected appointed officials recognize their special role in dealings with the city staff. That seemed like an odd thing to say. It's a little vague exactly what that means. And I think, in particular, the municipal code is actually pretty clear. You know, the city staff works for the city manager. The elected and appointed officials don't give direction, although they may seek input or information. So I would actually encourage that point be made. You know, maybe that's point J, and the rest of positive workplace environment becomes point K, and to perhaps have it track a little closer with the municipal code. That was 2.28.050. The other comment I had was it was under point E, the conflict of interest point, and in there's part of the verbiage talks about a material financial interest and organizational responsibility or personal relationship. And the material financial interest is clear. That's the normal kind of, at least the FPPC standard for conflict of interest. But organizational responsibility or personal relationship probably are not so clear. And that would be something that I would encourage as this draft comes back for that to be clarified exactly what that's intended to mean. Organizational responsibility, for instance, would not normally be viewed as a conflict of interest unless it falls into the material financial area. And personal relationship is the tricky one. I think that actually does get mentioned in the municipal code under a couple places where certain people in certain positions can't be related or cohabit with others. So I would just, that this is one I think would be worth investigating a little further.
Commissioner Takahashi.
Yeah, comments of similar vein. First is in the intro, trying to set the tone for ethical, fair, are entitled to fair, ethical, and accountable local government. I would recommend we add the word "and transparent" in that description because that's why we have public meetings, and that is a key element to what I would call a government that is not seen as one that's making deals and not in a transparent manner. So I think that is an important element because it strikes at the heart of a lot of controversies that we've suffered in the past. So that's really in the intro. B, in terms of professional conduct, should be above reproach. This obviously is a key element from the standpoint of just behavior by anybody representing the city that casts a shadow of unethical behavior through any means, whether it's an interview with the media, social media, any of those elements. I think it is a very key part of the ethics protocol. Section D, decisions based on merit. That one again too is a key element that I think is something that is another problem for that we've seen in the past where there have been obvious agendas by individuals and it's apparent. And so how do we work in the terms avoiding bias? Because that, from my perspective, is an issue because there have been meetings where it's been apparent that somebody has a very strong position without any elements of understanding or seeing the elements associated. So I think that's an important element. And then my last comment is there's absolutely nothing about ramifications of not following this policy. So is there something that essentially, so it's a so what as it's written, unless there's an adjoining document that states if Section J, Section H is extremely problematic. that there is some action somewhere else, then I would like to know where that is and how that happens and how that works. Otherwise, what's the point? You've got a piece of paper and it's not stating anything in terms of potential removal, recall. I don't know. Just what are the ramifications of unethical behavior that clearly violate this document? That would be, I think, something at least to have some kind of paragraph that it could be vague, right? to give some leeway, but something that says we mean it, and this is how it says we mean it. Otherwise, you're just talking to. I don't know. It's just another document that people can ignore. So anyway, those are my comments.
All right, Commissioner Moore.
I think the history of the ethics protocol probably should be brought up. This seemed like it began under the previous city council, and they did approve a code of ethics, which was rescinded by our current city council. And when I looked at this document, what concerned me was what problems were being addressed by it. What problems were they trying to solve here? Because it looks like we already have the training on ethics required by state law. We already have a number of laws which address these issues. So I'm wondering, why we're having this extra layer put in on the the commission's members. And further, some of the items appear almost to have an underlying story, such as the use of public resources and discussing whether or not it looks as though a commission member is inordinately getting staff time to perhaps follow one of their projects or study something that they individually are interested in. So I also agree with Commissioner Takahashi that there aren't penalties if you don't follow this protocol. So one of the issues is the vagueness of what's in the ethics protocol, and because it's written rather vaguely, how would you even reprimand someone? So you could have one city council 1 year which would say that something is abusive conduct, and then the following year another city council would not feel the same way. So how would someone be reprimanded under those conditions, and how could it be done fairly? So those are a couple of issues I have. So that one, as it's written, it's rather vague, and how are you going to address how do you know if somebody is not following these vague rules, and then what penalties will happen if they do not?
All right, thank you. I think I share similar concerns with the other commissioners. I've spent some time talking to some individuals privately in the city of Palo Alto as to how this has worked. Many have exclaimed that this was a way to keep people quiet. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? And the individuals that responded to me said this was a way to keep people from speaking out. And I felt that was a little bit alarming in terms of some of these things, because it put a lot of people at risk for saying, oh, that could be an issue, which surprised me. One of the examples is the conduct of members, for example. The way that's written, that keeps people from actually speaking their mind, and it takes away their First Amendment rights in terms of freedom of speech. That individual that I talked to said, hey, if they had this and they could do it again, they would add a clause that would say at the very end, under the staff or the public take the last sentence, add something that would say, with a respect for the city elected appointed officials and staff's protection of their free speech rights. And making that some element there that would create some balance in that clause. The other one on conflict of interest, that was a very interesting one. They mentioned that it's very hard for anyone to prove any of these conflicts of interest, and no matter what side of an issue you're on, whether it's individual, we can prove the financial interest. It's hard to prove the personal interest. And so back to Commissioner Takahashi's point, a lot of these items are very hard to enforce. Some city council members, back to Commissioner Moore's point, would say that's something that's censured. Some might take it to the part of actually removing someone from that. I mean, I think it's important to have an ethics policy, but I think the way this is written is very vague. And there's some cases where it does expose people to feeling that they may be at risk for taking a position. And I think when that happens, it worries me because it becomes Orwellian. So in that regard. So, and then I think I know there was something on the Palo Alto one about gifts, which was good. They went like 3 pages in on what are unacceptable gifts. But I think that kind of clarity may be needed in some of the other sections. Just a suggestion there. Yeah, they've got like 3 pages of things that are considered gifts, which is kind of funny. So. And what's the one that's missing here? There's something missing on the advocacy. I think the collapse of representing the city in advocacy. I think what was interesting on their version, J, advocacy, members shall represent the official policies or positions of the city council, board, or commission to the best of their ability when designated as delegates for their purpose. When presenting their individual opinions and positions, members shall explicitly state they do not represent their body or the city, nor will they allow the interference that they do. And I thought that combination with the representation on the front end, where they talk about in keeping with the roles of stewards, it's a good collapse. Might want to bring some of that back out. So that's it on my end. Oh, Commissioner Moore.
You actually reminded me of something which had occurred last year, where we had a planning commissioner use their image and quotes.
Oh, on campaign contribution.
In campaigning, right. It was during campaigning, and then we also had a city council member use their face and quotes in campaigning, and this had to do with the referendum for Valco. And so I would think that would be something we would want to discourage. So I don't know how that could be added into this protocol somehow. And we have no idea if that, I guess I would go under representing the city in advocacy, because we have no idea if there was any monetary gain from those actions.
Indirect monetary gains, yes. Or direct.
Yeah, I think that particular case is actually largely governed by the FPPC guidance, which, you know, it's maybe not surprisingly, as a law written by lawmakers, you know, it has unusual exclusions for conflict of interest around, around campaigning. So I think that I would agree around the clarification of whether you're speaking personal opinion or speaking officially. That's a constant area of friction, and one that, if you're going to go to the effort of having a policy, is one that I think trying to draw a sharper point on that would be good. The text you used, that you quoted from Palo Alto, is very common. When you're speaking as a representative on an official basis, then you really do need to represent the consensus of the body, and and when you speak on your own, you don't. So I think having that in there explicitly is good. And I would also echo. I also have concern about the there isn't a statement about how is this enforced or how is this exercised, and that even to the point of, I think that at a very minimum, what you would expect to see is that there would be a procedure of warning, of written warning, perhaps a verbal warning, perhaps a written warning, and then a formal action. Those actually exist in the city's staff requirements. So it may be a state thing for employees, and of course for elected and appointed officials, that's a different situation. But having a procedure there, I think, would be the benefit of all.
Any other comments from commissioners before we open up to the public?
Yes. So if
Commissioner?
we're going to look, thank you, if we're going to look at the FPPC to be the enforcer on advertising for campaigns, then it brings us back to paragraph A, complying with law, which is, to me, I read this as saying that we already have the U.S. and California constitutions, the Cupertino Municipal Code, city ordinances and policies and laws pertaining to conflicts of interest, election campaigns, financial disclosures, employer responsibilities, and open processes of governments. We already have these laws in place. Do we want to create another layer on top of what is already there? So if we're saying the FPPC would be taking care of the campaigning and those issues, why would we put in another layer here? Are we getting redundant in doing so? And this, which brings back the whole issue of doing this policy and also this protocol and having it be rather vague, is it truly necessary for us to have an additional layer of ethics protocol here? And if it's going to be vague without any penalties and policy for how people are going to be reprimanded, it makes me wonder, why are we doing this at all? So that is.
So yeah, I think that's worth discussion, because it seems to me these are trying to fill in behavioral elements, right? In terms of an appointed or elected official can comply with the letter of the law and yet have behaviors that are not necessarily becoming of the city and the responsibilities that come with that position, to a point of being somewhat abusive or not creating a positive work environment. Right? There's nothing about the city council shall promote a positive work environment. Right? These seem to me are really trying to address behaviors that aren't written into the letter of the law. That, and trying to summarize them in one place that is useful to have that document. So I would advocate that. I think it is a good document to have from the standpoint of, in terms of feedback to the public and our behavior. You kind of have this. These are our ethics. In addition, the very first one is comply with the law, right? So we have to comply with the law, and then there's many laws that go with that. But in addition to that, we are going to conduct ourselves in the following way. And so I think that's the intent, and I think it's a good intent from the standpoint of trying to have a civil government and civil commissions. So that's just my comment on that.
Yeah, I just add to that, you would never want to have anything in this policy which is in conflict with the governing law. But on the other hand, what you have is a situation where if there was a concern about conflict of interest, or if there was a concern about behavior, right now, because of the lack of a policy, of a more formal policy or guideline, what happens is that if you were watching this from the outside, you may see that there is no apparent progress because there is no apparent process. And so having a process so that people can see, hey, there was something that was that was raised as an issue that would normally lead to a written warning. Then you can see, did the warning happen? Did it not happen? And there's a process there where that decision, where that was deliberated and a decision was made. Right now, it's just kind of, it just kind of goes off into a void. So I think there's some value there. Although at the end of the day, there are many laws that that govern what is okay and not okay, and you know, we want to be compliant with those.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment. Jennifer Griffin, please walk up to the microphone stand. Yeah, timer? Okay. My last timer wasn't too good.
We'll see if this on?
You are on.
Okay, we'll
Welcome.
see. Does this bring back memories. Right after we annexed in 2000, this is the first location that we ever went to city council meetings. So I will start out. My name's Jennifer Griffin. I have been coming to the city council meetings since about 2003. And believe me, I have seen a lot of things in the last 17 years. Things that have happened now are not the first things that have happened in the city. I'm going to say right now, this code of ethics makes me a little bit nervous. I was there, I believe it was July or August of a year ago that the code of ethics suddenly appeared. Yes, it was the old city council. Okay, that's fine. A lot of places have code of ethics, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, a lot of groups, unions, etc. But it appeared, and then it put a tremendous load on the staff to try to produce a document in a month or two. And the staff really was hard pressed to try to come up with something because, you know, the end of summer, there's not a lot of people here. So I have problems with why did the code of ethics suddenly appear? I mean, it has been 17 years and no one has ever mentioned a code of ethics for Cupertino. I am a bit suspicious of its appearance, its intentions. I find it a bit totalitarian. And I think that if we're going to do this, we need to proceed cautiously and build a document that works for Cupertino. Now, I understand that this item has come back several times. I was at the Housing Commission when it was presented. I was a bit concerned about that, the drafts of it. If it's something based on what Palo Alto has, okay, well, maybe that's a great document, but Palo Alto is in no way Cupertino. I would never require our city council or our commissioners to sign a document. That is something that is a code of conduct of ethics. And I'm very, very concerned about someone attempting to remove a city council member or a commissioner without due process. Yes, there's another city I know of where they couldn't even remove someone who wound up on 2 different commissions. This was in Monterey, and it took them months. So I'm very suspicious of this document. Believe me, there have been other things that have happened in this city in the last 17 years that are far beyond what is going on now. So I find it highly strange that we have this. I don't think we need it. But if you all feel we do, let's proceed cautiously. There is no time constraint on this. Let's work it out. But I, as a member of the public who have watched many things unfold in this city and grown to understand and sort of know what is going on in Cupertino, in and out, etc., I'm very concerned about this document. We have different personalities
Jennifer,
in the city council right now. Let's proceed cautiously, but in no way don't put anything in there about removing people. That is totalitarian. Thank you.
Just a question to staff. What prompted the ethics? Anyone know the code of ethics protocol policy?
Well, as the staff report mentions, there was a subcommittee of council members to consider council member and commission communications, and that report that they produced directed the city manager and the city attorney to work together to come up with a brief statement of ethical obligations and recommended conduct.
Got it. Okay. All right. No other comments? We will move to item number 3.
Actually, one other comment. I think the discussion of censure has come up a couple times. Now, that's something that's would be in Robert's Rules of Order. This is one of the areas where there was discussion around the ethics policy and a change away from Robert's Rules of Order, but it seems like we're not doing that. That is just part of Robert's Rules of Order, so that exists independent of this policy. Is that correct?
I'm not familiar enough
Oh, okay.
with the details of Robert's rules and censure, but it
Oh,
sounds like
the standard
we have-
Robert's Rules of Order, yes, there's censure provisions in those. Yes,
Yeah.
that's correct. But the city is not following Robert's Rules of Order, correct?
No, I think it is.
We are?
I think that's in the municipal code, that when there is not something else, then Robert's Rules of Order applies. And there was discussion about adopting Rosenberg's Rules of Orders, simplified rules. That was,
Well, I'll take a look at that. Censure is automatically in Robert's Rules, yeah.
Yeah.
And the city, actually, we found an old policy that Robert's rules, as adopted in the 50s or something like that, is what the city is supposed to be
Yeah.
following now. So we're still trying to track down a version of that, actually.
yeah.
Oh, the 50s version of Robert's
Yes,
Rules.
exactly.
Point of inquiry. Excuse me. All right.
I'll comment as well that I think that it was an unusual path that this has gone through over the past couple of years. I think that there were a couple of zigs and zags which were probably outside of the bounds. I mean, reactive to situations that had arisen over the past few years in both directions, in all directions. And in some respects, trying to focus on something which is more standard. I think that actually when the city clerk assembled the draft, which was, the cause of much discussion in 2018, I think that was actually an attempt to try to see what were the prevailing standards in our neighboring cities, and maybe that's not always the best way for these things to get assembled. But I think that I'm glad that it is something which is more conventional as opposed to some of the areas we were going off in. But I do think that there's value in sharpening a couple of those points. In particular, I think the top issue here, whether it was in some of the old drafts that were proposed, that there is a sense that, wow, it seems like something is wrong here. So there's not a clear standard about what's right and what's wrong, and there's not a clear process for understanding, how people's concerns about that are being addressed. And if we can hit those two things with a little bit greater detail, I think that would be a good way to go with this document.
Yeah, I think my main concern is just making sure we protect people's First Amendment rights. If you've got a strong opinion, you should be able to voice it and not feel like you can't have the ability to do so. And if in any way that document prevents you from doing that, I think that's a huge concern, whether you're staff, public citizen, or someone else within the bounds. Right now, if you're, if things are in the defamation or that kind of lead, that's a different conversation. So,
Go ahead. Okay.
Commissioner
So
Kakashi.
that's really in reference to point B, which
no, just in general in the document. I don't want
Right.
any commissioner ever feel like they
Sure.
can't say what they think.
right. I think, but B was pretty specific in terms of personal charges, verbal attacks, and character motives of others. So versus First Amendment, right? So if you think that there's a tone that's attenuating First Amendment, then that may be something that should be in the intro paragraph from the standpoint of.
Could be for the
but-
overall document.
yeah.
Yeah. Could be.
I-
Commissioner Moore?
Yes, I think that you can see this crossing the line because it is written so vaguely that, like I said before, you could have, a city council version 2019 versus a city council 2022 and have them be very different for what they think is crossing the line for, personal charges and verbal attacks. And, and here we're actually questioning the character and motives of, the people that wrote this. What were they trying to do, right? So we could actually be in the wrong for even questioning this the way it's written. And the other issue is I really would like to see the advertising for developers issue discussed and, somehow included in here some way, because that issue actually did, with regards to the referendum, end up going to city council. And you had someone who had advertised for that project, and then it went in. I don't know how the vote went, if there was an abstention or not, but I think that should be, hashed over and reviewed. Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add, Commissioner? No? Okay. All right. I guess we can move on to public hearings. None?
Sure. I think between the city attorney and I, we have enough notes to move forward and forward that to the city council for their consideration. So you have, we don't have any items on the public hearings. We do have an old business.
Drafts Parks and Recreation System Master Plan.
Correct. With us, we have a couple of special guests. We have our interim director for Park and Rec, Randy Shorts, if I say that correctly,
Welcome.
and Gail Seats as a manager here to present to you, hopefully a brief presentation and for discussion. Part of the presentation will also be addressing your comments that you made last meeting. This is a courtesy meeting to come back to you, just to present to you how your comments have been addressed and considered in the next version of the draft plan. So with that, Gail?
Yes, thank you.
Or Randy?
Thank you. And first off, thank you to the commission for convening tonight and holding a special meeting so that we could be here and bring back the draft Parks and Recreation System Master Plan to you and update you on how it has evolved. We really appreciate your time, especially at this busy time of year. So a big thank you to you. We're here to share with you what has happened with the Parks and Recreation System Master Plan since the last time you saw it in February of 2019, earlier this year. You will recall that the plan is a strategy to guide our future development, renovation, and management of both parks and recreation facilities here in Cupertino, and to provide direction for the city and the Parks and Recreation Department. The planning horizon covered in this document is through approximately the year 2040. And this plan will help us in coming years as we develop budgets, work plans, capital improvement programs, and a strategic plan for the Parks and Recreation Department. It does identify a series of tasks and actions to consider implementing, and it is deliberately structured as a flexible document so that we can adapt to opportunities and changes in coming years. This is a slide you've seen before of the planning process. We are in the next to bottom yellowish bar, plan development and refinement. We developed a plan. We aired it earlier this year. We have refined that plan, and we reissued it in the third week of October this year. What will happen moving forward is that in conjunction with this revised draft master plan, we have issued an environmental clearance document, an initial study, and a mitigated negative declaration that was posted for a 30-day formal comment period from October 23rd through November 22nd, and went through the usual posting and publicity. Tonight, we are sharing with you the master plan document, briefing you on where it is, and hearing your any further thoughts you'd like us to know. On Thursday morning at 9:30, the Environmental Review Committee will consider the initial study and the mitigated negative declaration for this master plan. It is a programmatic mitigated negative declaration because it looks at the overarching program addressed by this master plan, and individual subsequent projects will undergo their own individual evaluation pursuant to the CEQA process. And CEQA is California Environmental Quality Act, an acronym that we use pretty commonly. The master plan will go to the Parks and Recreation Commission this Thursday evening, so later that same day at 7 p.m. at the Community Hall, and that body will consider the master plan in more detail and will formulate a recommendation for the City Council. Thereafter, both the draft master plan, the input we've received, and the environmental clearance documents and the input we've received will all move forward to our City Council for their consideration. about adoption of the documents or whatever further actions they would like to take. There is not a date identified for that yet. It's not firmed up, but it looks like it will be sometime in February to accommodate everyone's schedules. So those are next steps, and the bottom bar, that orange bar, plan adoption, is our ultimate goal. The master plan is organized as it was when you saw it earlier this year. The appendices are the same, except that there is a new appendix, Appendix E, which has pages for each of our park sites and provides overviews of those parks. This is an overview of where the land is in our park system. This particular chart does include school sport fields where we have a joint use agreement to manage them after hours. But it excludes a number of things also. And the important thing that it excludes is Santa Clara County parkland and Mid-Peninsula Regional open space preserves that straddle our city limit lines. And there is over 400 acres of county parkland and preserve land that is within our city limits, but it's not counted as city parkland because we don't own the land, nor do we manage it. So it's not in that total of the 224 acres. An overview of where some of our particular types of recreation facilities fall in terms of quantity. You've seen this before. And I wanted you to be aware that there is a chart in our recreation brochure every time we issue it that summarizes some of the facilities, particular facilities at our various park sites. And there is more information, more detailed information in Table A1 in the appendix of this master plan about our individual parks and what is in them. Reminder that throughout the airing process, there were several bodies that weighed in on this master plan throughout, and that there were various opportunities to participate. We did outreach in a number of ways. We talked about those in more detail the last time I was with you. And the results of all that we heard led to identifying 12 overarching themes that were common threads, came up again and again in a number of ways, and they are things that have helped us form the content of the master plan. There is a vision statement that was developed collaboratively and was aired with the Parks and Rec Commission and the City Council, and a mission statement with a number of particular points. This is unchanged. My forward button is not moving. Yeah.
It's a big doc.
There we go. Okay, thank you for the technical assist. Thank you, Interim Director. Okay. There are 7 goals in this document. Those goals are unchanged. They are not in priority order, but the first 4 goals are noted on this slide. The next 3 goals on this slide, they are intact. And a reminder that we identified system-wide goals, objectives, and actions that are discussed in detail in Chapter 3. And then there are opportunities that are particular to specific sites or facilities or trails, opportunities for adding different kinds of recreation elements, and a discussion of potential major investments. In Chapter 4, there's a bit of a change. The first several changes of Chapter 4 have been updated. And instead of talking about just a couple of our individual parks, we now have batched them by category and talked about the types of opportunities associated with the types of parks, because now each park has its own park page in Appendix E. Chapter 4 continues to talk about opportunities for existing trails, joint use opportunities with a focus on school sites where we have a joint use agreement with Cupertino Union School District. The major park and recreation opportunities discussed in Chapter 4 and also in Table F2. The first one is new parks and how to tackle that. The second one is new trails. We have continued forward with the idea that folks have identified some major potential facilities that we don't have that would be used if they were available. And finally, on the major opportunities is expanding senior services and or the senior center down the line as our senior population expands, and something similar with teen services, teen space, and opportunities to better serve our youth. The table F3 and Chapter 4 discuss the diverse kinds of play areas. We would like to look at including, adding, or expanding diverse types of features, event space, expanding the kinds of sports facilities we have, adding things like pickleball, and those are unchanged. The final element in that category is natural vegetation enhancements, which is kind of a big title for a wide range of things. And with your patience, I'd like to just flag a couple of things for this commission that you may not hear about, things that Parks and Rec staff hear about and that sometimes our Parks and Rec Commission hears about. But out in the Stevens Creek corridor, back in 2009 and in 2013-14, we did 2 restoration projects within the creek and along the creek banks, and really did a focused job of making that area more wildlife friendly, improve the habitat value, support biodiversity, and yet be an inviting place for the public and environmental education. And that work has paid off in some ways that haven't been maybe talked about a lot, but we have seen new species nesting and breeding out there since we did that work. And in the monarch caterpillars, we have had adults fly through that area, but in 2015, for the first time, we have had monarch caterpillars on the milkweed at McClellan Ranch and at the Stockelmeyer Ranch site. And they have been flourishing and loving having a place to perpetuate the species. So now we are helping the monarch population in a very direct way. Anna's swallowtails, the butterfly up above in the middle, were noted breeding at McClellan Ranch in 2018 for the first time. We have not had those caterpillars. We have had checker spot butterflies started breeding in 2010 after we did the phase 1 restoration. We found them first on the bee plant that is out there. Another species that's out there that's new is great horned owls. They started nesting along the restored part of the creek corridor in 2016. And the last 2 seasons, a pair of great horned owls has nested right above the Captain Stevens play area. There's a tree there that they're fond of, so they were there in 2018, they were there again in 2019, and they are raising the young owlets. The lower left picture is one that Keith Wandry, our McClellan Ranch staffer, took of the pair from last year. So I just wanted this commission to know that we're seeing some success and some of the things we were hoping for by emphasizing natives and vegetation enhancements and helping out our wildlife in a park setting. It's really working, and there are opportunities to do that in other places. You know, for example, along Saratoga Creek on the east side of town, there are places we can do this kind of thing more, and we hope that we would have the support of this commission down the road as ideas come forward for things we can actively do that are tangible here in our community to continue this kind of work. So thank you for my blurb about wildlife. A number of things that are identified as opportunities in the master plan have already been funded or been initiated. And you saw this earlier. These things are talked about in Chapter 5, some of the things that are underway or launching. We haven't just been sitting still this whole time. And there is also a discussion of what we can do in the short term on each of these things, short of having, a big pile of money and building something big and splashy. What can we do right away? What kinds of things are feasible? Those things are identified in this plan. And the same thing for those big major projects. What can we do now? There are short-term opportunities noted and discussed in Chapter 5, and these are also discussed in detail on Table F4, the previous slide in detail on Table F3. Lastly, it takes money to implement things, make changes, and add things. Chapter 5 discusses that, and there's a lot more detail in Appendix G on opportunities to fund these opportunities. And Appendix H has some tools for prioritizing capital investments. Now to the good stuff. What's been going on? In January 2019, we aired the first draft master plan with a range of commissions and workshops and youth and teens, and got quite a bit of feedback. Our city council did review the document 3 times, in February, in April, and in May. And just because I so love this, the Youth and Teen Forum in January, we got fantastic feedback. It was in your packet back in February, but our young folks had ideas that are very thoughtful and that we paid close attention to. Very wise suggestions for us. And to recap what we've heard a lot of detailed things from community members over all of these months, but the primary things we've heard, among the things that have come up the most frequently, are that people are hoping we can acquire more parkland, that we need more park space, however we can achieve that. There's a very high interest in park equity, in particular in geographic equity, and in somehow addressing our underserved areas. And we heard the east side of town come up quite a bit, and to some degree the north central side of town also. But people are very concerned about that. We heard that clearly. And they want the parks to be walkable. Everyone wants to be able to walk to a good neighborhood park. Trails and walkability are a constant theme. They've remained a theme during this round of comments. And we did hear a lot about people's desire to have access to nature, connect to nature in our park system, and that they really do prioritize being good stewards of our creek corridors, our natural areas, and doing our best to help our local wildlife. A final thing we heard regularly was people questioning the major new facilities, in particular the large, expensive things such as a potential aquatic center, a potential performing arts center, or a potential gym and multi-use recreation center. There were questions, do we actually need those? And aren't other things more important, especially in the short term? For example, more parkland. We heard that question raised by people. So now I'd like to chat with you about what we heard from you back in February. And this is not 100% of your comments, but it touches on a number of the things we heard. I've got a couple of slides. The feedback we heard from this body is that indeed equity is critical. We must prioritize addressing geographic equity, park distribution, and equity, not just geographic, but that's what we heard about as a clear priority, and that we need to acquire park space. We have park deficient areas, and that we need an action plan for doing that. We need to identify what to acquire, where, how. We need some means to be more flexible in how we acquire parkland and address these deficient areas and underserved areas. There was talk about parkland dedication and what constitutes acceptable parkland, and that is one of the many actions in Chapter 3. And as you know, you all tackled a step on that in November, and tomorrow night the council will be having a first hearing on a change to Muni Code, so that's moving forward. We heard talk about particular elements that are of interest to this commission. There we heard about nature play and that should be emphasized and added. The community gardens are desired and geographically distributed. Currently, our only garden site is at McClellan Ranch Preserve, and we'd like to have more gardens in more places. There was talk of making our parks more natural and making them desirable destinations. We heard from you about the importance of trees, expanding tree canopy, providing pollinator pathways, and that native vegetation aspect, and that it is a priority, and that there are also opportunities perhaps outside of just land that the city owns. There could be opportunities on commercial sites or at other locations that we should be open to supporting. You mentioned that when we choose, modify, and move forward with our programming, that staff should be coordinating actively with the library, with the adult ed programs that our high school district offers, with others, with all the folks that offer recreation programming here. We should partner and look at not duplicating things and be involved together as a community. We heard about partnering with schools and how important that is. And one thing that got mentioned is that if there's a goal to have performing arts space, our high schools have very nice theater and stage areas, and perhaps there's an opportunity there to explore, is there some sharing that could occur, and that could be preferable to work with another entity such as one of our local school districts rather than looking first to a commercial enterprise, that would be something to reach out about. There was further talk about specific school sites, in particular Sedgwick, and about what kind of partnership opportunities could occur. And in talking about schools, another mention was made about traffic and parking, that before we build a big new thing or expand use or programming at a site, that we should be mindful of sites that already have high traffic and have parking demand, and be thoughtful about what we do, especially on the east side that's experiencing traffic, that needs to be part of our thinking before we make changes and add things. Further thoughts were how the school space is used and how the school fields are used. Are they used in an optimal fashion? The idea that restrooms should be thought about, particularly at sport field sites, and a number of them do not have access to restrooms. There's a desire for basketball. We don't have any full-size basketball courts, just one multi-use court at the sports center that's in high demand, and a substandard indoor space in the basement of the sports center. And it's a popular activity, particularly among our young people, and that basketball is something that's desired. And the folks near Wilson Park, in one of our surveys, quite a number of people said they'd like to have a court there, among other potential locations. We heard from you that you'd like priorities to be identified, especially for shorter-term actions. And this is the last slide. In recapping the kind of range of things that we heard from the Planning Commission, is to stay apprised about what's going on at Rancho Rinconada, and stay apprised also regarding the Flint Center and what is unfolding there, and in particular, are there opportunities of some sort. And also, as always, that outreach remains very important moving forward with anything we add or change, and particularly before initiating any sort of new improvements. We had a suggestion to consider other types of methods, perhaps even, online conferencing, a way for people to dial in from home if they're watching their kids, that we should be open to new methods instead of expecting people to come here to a meeting. And there's an interest in metrics and data and benchmarking and having data-based decision-making, and having more data be made available. We feel that this feedback is addressed in the master plan and/or is compatible with the master plan and/or things that can be in our strategic plan moving forward. And many of your comments were directly addressed. Some were already in there. You were mentioning things that are in those tables, in the chapters, and/or in the actions. And if you saw the red lines that are posted on the website, there was a red line document that identified the strikeouts and the additions to highlight what the changes were in the master plan as it has been edited to move forward. We heard from other commissions also. They agreed with you that it's critical to acquire park space and to look at our underserved areas and to address equity and an equitable park system with geographic equity. There was a number of specific elements mentioned that had high overlap with what some of the things this commission said and with what we heard from the City Council. There's again an emphasis on looking at partnerships, in particular with our schools, and emphasizing connectivity. The last two bullets are things that the Parks and Recreation Commission wanted to emphasize to all of us that read the master plan. They wanted to remind folks that it's an informational document, it's a goal-style document, it is a compilation of the range of input we heard, and it's not intended to be a budget document. It's not saying we're going to do all of these things and here's the pile of money that we need. It is a framework for moving forward and for decision making. They also felt it was important to emphasize that the actions, the goals, and the potential projects are not prioritized, and that is on purpose. Again, it's intended as a framework, that it isn't a prioritized document, and that is intentional. A quick summary of the kinds of things we heard from the City Council at the 3 meetings in February, April, and May. The Council had interest in some of the particular elements. Certain types of enhancements are on their mind. All-inclusive play is on their mind. Community gardens in multiple places. All-inclusive play in multiple places. Outdoor exercise equipment. The native plantings and pollinators. Dog areas. They mentioned a number of individual things, individually or with multiple council members expressing their interest in tackling those things in the shorter term. And they also are highly supportive of focusing on underserved and park deficient areas and addressing those the very best we can. That middle bullet is some other things they mentioned about figuring out flexible opportunities to fund some of these ideas, things that this commission had brought up and the Parks and Rec Commission, and is in that funding appendix. They wanted to clarify the early actions and to identify the short-term improvements more clearly. They wanted some information about the rec facilities, which are major recreation buildings. That's now Table A2. And they wanted a page added for each park, which became Appendix A. And in conclusion, I'll chat about what's new. What did we do? Well, one thing is that we worked to clarify throughout the document about those major new facilities, that those major new facilities would be a last step, not a first step. They are an idea. They're something that would be lovely to have, but they are not. None of them is proposed for the shorter term, and that a lot of steps would need to occur first. And there's many steps we would do, including pursuing partnerships and other things identified in this document. We wanted to make sure people understood that. The geographic equity was emphasized more strongly, and there's language added in the charts about geographic equity, not just of park land, but for where community gardens are, where nature play is, where all-inclusive play is, where all kinds of features are, that we need to look at the distribution of those things and where our community members live. Other things got individually added. Lawrence Mitty acquisition was flagged in a number of places. We added narrative about the importance of the quote, smaller enhancements, those things we can do faster, more easily, at less expense. In Chapter 5, a new section was added about that flags some of the council's input, and that what we heard from the community also, that some of these smaller things are going to be very important and they'll make a big difference. We added a narrative about how the maps in Appendix D work, map D3 and D4 that look like heat maps about park access, how much acreage you can get to from where you live. So that narrative had been in a previous report. We added it back into this report. We've added some graphics and those park site overviews in Appendix E, that table about the, I keep hitting the wrong thing. Thank you. And that's been added. And there are a number of changes to Chapter 3, which is the goals, objectives, and actions. These couple of slides flag most of the changes, things that we added to be compatible with the current work programs, and from guidance we received during this input process. We added some things to Goal 1 about conservation, Goal 3 about equity. That laundry list flags some of the red line changes that we made to be more explicitly aligned with the general plan and to respond to comments, particularly from this body and the Parks and Rec Commission and Council. In Goal 6 in quality, there were some things added that we hope you like. Same thing with Goal 7 on sustainability. And that was mostly about partnering to offer things and on the means of accepting property and donations. That is a recap of what has been added and changed. We wanted to apprise you. We wanted to thank you for all the great thoughts and comments you shared with us in February. And we would be most interested in hearing your anything else you would like us to bring forward to the Parks and Recreation Commission on Thursday evening, or that you think this community should be aware of, anything that we should be aware of. If we got anything wrong or missed anything, please let us know. And thank you very much for your time. Most appreciated.
Thank you very much for your comprehensive summary, compilation, and analysis on the plan. I know you guys spent a lot of time on it. If there is one input from my end that I find very important here is really the section on G9 and G8 funding sources. I strongly advocate limiting the amount of taxes that are going from hotel occupancy taxes to land use taxes. But I hope, and I like the point to leave paved areas for food trucks. I think it's very important for us to up the concessions, up the public-private partnerships and sponsorships in some of these areas. There is significant opportunities on the advertising revenue side, the development of new types of food and concessions and retail operations that could be generated there, and also thinking about what some of those private-public partnerships could do to improve not only just the programming aspects, but also things that might be more like whether they're fairs, whether they're community events, whether they're things that actually bring people together. And I think there are opportunities to do that. Sorry, I jumped ahead of my other commissioners. Anyone else? It's a long document to read last night. Commissioner, anyone? Commissioner Moore? No.
I really enjoyed reading through this document and the appendices. I have a number of comments and some questions. I was wondering if we could possibly pull up the new maps or the reintroduced maps, D3 and D4, which discuss the park acreage. Right.
D3
okay.
and D4?
So,
Yeah.
yes, those are the ones. Okay. So I had a question on both of them, and if you could explain the difference between the two. And I was particularly interested in the area near Fremont Older that is showing the accessible acreage as 0. And if the accessible acreage could be explained and then distinguish D3 from D4, because I couldn't quite tell the difference. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, certainly. Map D3 looks at acreage that you can walk to from a residential area that is within a 10-minute walk, so that's roughly half a mile. And it looks at all park acreage. If there's a label on the map, that site was counted as acreage that you can walk to. So it did include things that are not owned or managed by the city. It did include Rancho Rinconada. It does include the nearby county and Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space Preserve lands. If you could walk to it within 10 minutes, it got counted. And then we looked at how much acreage you could walk to. And in some cases, walking is faster than driving. We looked at places where you can shortcut, where there are trail connections, you can get over or under a major impediment. In some cases, you can drive somewhere, but it's very hard to walk there because there's lack of a walking route. So this is specifically a walkability map, and it looks at everything. It looks at all the acreage that is public in some manner, whether we own or operate it or not. And that was the intention of this map, to see, can you walk to park space, open space from your residence?
If I could comment here, I think it's actually interesting. One of the questions that Commissioner Moore had was, what's that pink blotch by Fremont Older? That's actually Seven Springs. So one of the things I think you'll find interesting here are those pink areas are ARP zones that have private open space. So it would not be normally accessible to the city.
Yes,
and I believe that's actually almost all of them are planned development areas. I could be wrong.
yes, we did not include private open space or private facilities in this mapping. For example, the YMCA, it's a recreation facility, but it's private. We didn't count that as a rec facility you could walk to. So we thought the simplest thing to do was to label the things that are counted and what acreage you can walk to. And we were really looking at where people can or can't walk to much space. And the redder the map is, the worse it is, the bluer it is, the better it is in terms of acreage. And you can see that even if you look at all kinds of acreage, there are some kind of hot spots on the east and north central part of town and over by Homestead Villa, that things that they can walk to within our city limits is what we counted. It's very limited. We did not count things that are outside of our city limits. You'll see that other parks in Sunnyvale, San Jose, and so on are not counted. They're not labeled. Even if you can walk to it within a half a mile from your home, we did not count it because it's not within Cupertino. There are a couple of quirky spots over on the west side of town off of Homestead, up Alpine. You actually can't walk to Varian Park within 10 minutes because you can't, it's one of those you can't get there from here. So there's that funny red spot, and it's in fact true. Even though you could, as the crow flies, it would work, it's a little hard to get to because of the geometry. On map D4, that slices things differently, and that was an effort to get at the general plan statement about being able to have access to neighborhood serving park space. And we took a stab at what that meant in this master plan and provided a sample definition and then looked at how that changed the acreage that was available. And that definition is in Chapter 3, It means that you have to be, if you are a park, you need to be open daily to everybody. So that immediately excluded school sites, because our school sites, you can't go in and use the sport field if the school is using it during the school year. So immediately all of our joint use park sites fell off the plate. We also have a series of definitions about offering 3 drop-in activities where you don't need a reservation, you don't need to pay, you don't need staffing, and that a site would need to provide multiple uses to be really neighborhood serving. It couldn't be only turf with nothing else there. It needed to actually serve the neighborhood. So we took a stab at what that meant. And most of our city parks remained in play. The 2 that fell off the plate in that definition are Little Rancho and Canyon Oak Park had 2 drop-in uses the way we defined them, but not 3. So you see that they are a red zone. They also don't offer much acreage over there. So even though folks in those neighborhoods can walk to Rancho San Antonio, with the county parks and mid-pen preserves are off the plate because we were looking at the neighborhood serving parks. And so we excluded things that are regional serving. So we excluded regional facilities. We also excluded special use facilities such as the Mary Avenue Dog Park. You may be able to walk there, but if you don't have a dog, are you likely to walk to the dog park? Maybe, if you love dogs, but probably not so much. So the special use sites were removed from consideration. The ones that wound up meeting our set of criteria are the ones that have labels on this map. And then we ran the same filter about how much acreage can you walk to if we screen out the sites that don't meet those sample criteria for neighborhood serving. And you see from that perspective, there's quite a bit more underserved area. And in particular, a big difference resulted from excluding the joint use school sites from consideration, from calling them non-neighborhood serving based on those sample criteria. There's a whole lot more residents that are now underserved in acreage. So this was illuminating information. We included it because it's something that had been discussed during the preparation of the master plan. We thought it was useful information.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I would actually like to have another map that could perhaps discuss the large gyms, because the Bay Club closed at Valco, and there were, according to the employees of the Bay Club, there were a lot of Cupertino residents that were local members, and then we got moved to about 6 miles away to Santa Clara Bay Club. So now we've got quite a commute to a gym. So I'd be interested in what we have for large gyms in the area, and year-round swimming as well.
Okay.
And what kind of proximity that people have to that. Okay, so I have just general notes throughout the
Actually,
whole.
can I jump in?
Oh, sure.
While we have this map up? So I think it's actually quite interesting. It took me a little while to puzzle out exactly what was going on here.
Yeah.
And so I actually, one of the things that's happening is there's a density coloration. I really think that for this to be reflective of the situation, you probably do want to look at there are a number of these things which are kind of major, planned development areas. They have private land. I mean, there's one of the swimming pool across the street is one of the famous ones.
Yeah.
I think that those probably warrant a separate coloration, or some way to represent it so that you can understand it. I think one of the purposes of looking at a map like this is to understand how well is the community served. And in those cases, for the people who live in a planned community and have access to that space, they actually, in Seven Springs is unusual because it actually has a lot of open space there. Their needs, by, whether Quimby Act or however you want to do this, their needs may actually be met by the facilities that exist. They're just not public ones. And then there's a whole interesting question about private facilities as well, which it's probably harder to. I mean, I think it's probably harder to do as a city effort, but that those are a couple things where I think makes it hard to interpret exactly. There's actually two things being overlaid in these maps. One of them is the style of housing in the area, and that's separate from the density available parkland. So in some respects, I think that a lot of people would find it illustrative to see one of these maps, which is just colored for single-family homes versus multifamily dwellings,
Okay.
Independently of the Park Service. Thanks.
Yeah, since we're on these maps, I think it's easiest if we just all talk about it now. But yeah, they are hard to figure out, and I understand the intent, right? We're just trying to show serviceability, who's underserved, but it's not really real clear given all of these. There's so many constraints that you've kind of put into this in terms of 3 uses and so that first you have to understand the constraints to even really understand what the map is saying. But the constraint about ignoring adjacent parklands that are within the walking distance, I would question whether or not that's wise, because it'll point something as underserved when it's not funded by us, true, and it's not, but it is a city park of an adjacent that a Cupertino residents would have access to unless it's a private park. And then would you then strive for us to purchase land in that so-called underserved area when it's really not underserved, and there are areas that are truly underserved? Like Sarah Park in Sunnyvale, for example, is a great park. And in fact, the city of Cupertino, the northern portion actually was in the Little League boundary, so that's where the ball fields are that the Little League would play at. But I think that would at least kind of give you a true picture, if you will, because I think that's what we're after, right? Is where is it underserved? And on the east side, you've got Lawrence Expressway, which is a really hard stop that it just does not. If there were a park on the other side of Lawrence Expressway, you should not include that because of the fact that you can't really get to it, right? You can't walk to it unless you go to a major intersection, and it would be harder to figure out. And there's a body of water. There's all kinds of constraints there. But others that are legitimately close, it seems like that would at least give us an accurate picture of really how much access does a person have to a recreational facility. And maybe there's an asterisk that says close to a non-city park or an adjacent.
Or non-public.
Yeah, or something like that. Anyway.
Thank you, Commissioner.
We'll come back to that in a little while because I know that you're dying to go back to Kitty's questions and
Yeah, I want to jump back to Commissioner Moore's
Thank you.
points, and then we'll come back.
Sorry, I
here.
forgot your last name.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Oh, okay. So going back to D3.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Okay,
Yes.
so I believe what Commissioner Fung is saying is that the red area for Seven Springs might not be very accurate because they have their own private area, and they're also adjacent to Fremont Older,
Right.
which I've gone hiking through there, and you're allowed to bring dogs and single track mountain bike through there as well. Let's see. So I think when you bring up the issue that you have private developments which have a gym and they might have a swimming pool at them versus the single-family homes or some apartments which might not have any of these additional facilities except for maybe some laundry facilities, that it makes it harder to determine who's not being served in the community. And if I don't know how you would be able to gather all that data, but it would be pretty interesting to find that out. Because, like I said,
apartment buildings often have a swimming pool, which it's sort of, so there's a whole thing about recreational facilities versus open space.
It sounds like under other recreational resources, there could be a key there just for private facilities. And then that way people can understand that
Yeah.
Seven Springs has 3 different
Yeah, or
private
maybe it's a
facilities.
different map,
Another
which is
map.
private versus.
Yeah, just add that to the map would help. But policy-wise, I think people who do understand the community do recognize why those areas are red in this context.
Yeah, if I can
To
add,
help them
Mr.
understand.
Chairman, that I completely agree with these comments, that the focus should not necessarily be on city-owned, but on publicly served, and where the public can be served by non-city-owned facilities. The county park system with over 400 acres is a great example of that. The private facilities are used, as you mentioned back in the previous meetings, to look at partnerships with private businesses or communities. And then to go back and to say that they're not counted would be a big conflict, that those should be counted. We should be looking at all those opportunities. For these maps, I would just say the concept was to look at them in many different ways. And Gail has a wide variety of more maps of these, that different looking. But I completely agree, and we would pass along the comments to the Park and Rec Commission when we talk to them on Thursday night, that the feeling from the Planning Commission is that we should be including more of the facilities, whether they're publicly owned or privately owned or county or whatever.
Well, Randy, you already have one of them, which is the local parks open to public map
Right.
identified. I think if you just add the private facilities in a PUD or private facilities that are funded by individual groups, I think that would help.
Agreed. Thank you.
Like that's where the YMCA might fit in, or where other places. What people are doing they're compensating by going to the nearest adjacent park, even if it's not in their city.
Thank you.
Well, this does kind of get into a philosophical question when you're looking at the east side and it has limited open space available for purchase, for whether or not you believe or city council believes in having a private gym versus a city-owned gym or a city-owned aquatic center to serve the parkland requirement for that area. And I think that is something that city council should be directing what their philosophy is, particularly with the east side and the north side of Cupertino. So going back to my list, I did notice that you had a pollinator pathway map, and I think that that's something that was new added to the plan. I was a little concerned about that because it showed Tantau as a pollinator pathway, and I was wondering how that would happen. It has mature trees along that street, and the residents have already landscaped their parkway strip, which is between the sidewalk and the curb. So I'm wondering what that idea was for that plan. And I'm hoping that we could have a Cupertino Municipal Code requirement so that large canopy native trees could be required in some portion of the landscaping for commercial development, and that there'd be some definition of what a pollinator pathway landscape would include, some listing of plants or something, so that a portion of commercial landscaping would be required to have those elements in it. And also, let's see, commercial CMC requirements for off-leash dog areas and community gardens for new residential developments, so that all that responsibility is not put onto the city. So for instance, if you have a development that's going to have 1,500 residential units, that X many square feet of space would be designated for off-leash dog area, because they would probably have pets that would need to be taken care of. I was trying to figure out what the status of the Stevens Creek Corridor Master Plan is. Would you be able to say that?
Yes, the plan went through a public input process, and as of, I think it was April 2016, a draft preferred alternative went forward and was brought to the City Council. And at that time, it triggered a discussion about investing in the Stevens Creek corridor, and specifically investing in the pools at Blackberry Farm, and that sport fields weren't necessarily desirable at the golf course location, but they were needed in other places. And at the direction of the council, that master plan has been deferred while this process has moved forward to look at our citywide needs. They felt that that was a necessary first step. So when this is squared away, the Stevens Creek Corridor Master Plan has been waiting to come forward and be completed.
Okay.
So it's waiting.
So it hasn't been finished. I did read one of the letters talking about the Blue Pheasant and how this particular person did not feel that venue was appropriate for the city and wanted to look at something else, and they felt that there were issues with drivers leaving that facility at night, running into bollards and that type of thing. And I tended to agree with it. I was concerned with, well, I will mention that Lawrence Mitty has been in the works for 10 years now, and it would be great if that could be finalized. I was looking at the costs of these items. I understand that they're not prioritized, but I was pretty shocked. The aquatics facility, 45 to 60 million, gymnasium, 30 to 40 million, performing arts center at 60 to 100 million. And I noticed that for the Foothill De Anza College District, they have a proposal now for $898 million in bonds, which would generate $48 million annually. So I'm wondering if there's some way that we can coordinate with Foothill De Anza should this pass, because we are losing the Flint Center. So there's been a lot that's transpired since the start of this year with regards to the Flint Center. And I'm curious, because it was mentioned, the the Fremont Union High School District for Performing Arts Center, and I was wondering if some discussion could go on between the city and Fremont Union High School District for that.
Or De Anza Foothill.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
right, either way.
Okay. Okay.
Right, and I agree with Chair Wong about the transit occupancy tax, looking into that to have it directed to parks. That was a topic that was brought up. I thought that was very interesting. In fact, I think we probably need a study session regarding funding, either start at the Planning Commission or Parks and Rec, and that seems like that's going to be a huge issue. Appendix 8, the prioritization, I felt that it ensured inequity in the Parks Plan. And the reason why I felt that was that if you look at PDF 109, you take available space and you multiply it by 2. And so you're doubling that weighting. And for repair and replace, that also got double weighted times 2. And timing, if there was some special funding that could be acquired, that also would multiply by 2. So to me, that would ensure that parks which were already in existence would get more funding and resources put their way, the way this weighting would happen. So I'm concerned about the methodology for prioritization, because I think if we're trying to go for equity, you might want to get rid of those multipliers and then be looking at another way to create equity, like come up with another methodology.
It's always the
Okay.
other way.
Right. Okay, so here's the times 2 that I was referring to. So when you do that, it ends up heavily weighting existing parks so that they're going to end up gathering more resources in the future. So if you're trying to get the east side taken care of and the north side taken care of, I think that makes that gap just that much further.
Commissioner Moore, are you good?
Although I understand your point there, I think that there's probably a differentiation between the capital funds required to build a new park and the operational fees. So, if that was the intent, then that could be clearer. If you look at the cost of producing a single park versus the maintenance of many parks in the city, it will dwarf that cost. So it's really a different kind of consideration.
I did have a question in that same document on PDF 85. There was a land acquisition cost table. If that could just be glanced at, because it looked like one of the numbers needed to be 30 million rather than 10. And it looked like it was stating that land acquisition was about $10 million an acre for the kind of land you would want for parks.
Page. I'm sorry, it was.
PDF 85?
Do you know what the page is in the document? Did you?
Yeah, PDF numbering and the
Okay.
document numbering are off by 20.
Understood.
It had to do with
Just
land
clarifying that, yeah,
acquisition.
You know what? I think.
Well, it was referring to a 3-acre parcel, so
Yes.
that's why I felt that it should be 30 million for that.
Okay, I've got it. Is it this chart? Perhaps?
No, but land costs at the moment are about 2 million for a quarter acre. So it's about 8 million to 10 million an acre.
Yeah, that's, so this chart, which is one of the ones about costs, talks about a sample 3-acre neighborhood park, the development costs, and then plus the land acquisition, and it was ballparked at $10 million an acre. So that's consistent with what we're hearing.
I think that was actually what was reported at the last meeting, that the assessed value that the Public Works uses for the parkland dedication was at 10 million per acre right now.
Yeah.
Anything else from anyone else? I've got a few more items, but Commissioner Takahashi, go ahead, please.
So reiterate the thanks and well done on all the work and effort put into the plan to this date, as well as all the outreach. And I mean, it's apparent that that was a very strong commitment to seek as much input as possible to develop the plan. So that's a positive. The trails and connectivity, you said was highly desirable by, I would say, a majority, I guess, of the input that you received. And I think that's reflects a desire in the community for connectivity and to actually be able to walk to these parks. But therein lies a huge challenge. I mean, just to get a trail that is essentially already there approved recently was an incredible battle. While people want it, they just don't want it close to them, which is always mind-boggling to me in terms of thinking about community and the greater good. But how do we start to figure out what are ways to facilitate those trails and connectivity, because that is, I think, a major element of enhancing a community in itself. But it's one of those problems that we've been trying to solve for a long time and have not made much progress. I'll echo the facilities question in terms of those costs versus the use. And then also, I think MP4, which is the reinvigorate, I think that's actually a very strong positive from the standpoint of figuring out where we can have multi-use. But also, there are some places where there's infrastructure that's in place that, if it were completely repurposed, to me seems potentially as a step backwards. So the softball field, for example, at Memorial Park is a lighted facility. And so that's not, to me, the best path forward there is to figure out how to develop multi-uses for that space. Can it be a dog park during the day and softball league city run during the night, or can cricket share that space, and then you could have evening cricket leagues. So versus once you tear that infrastructure down, which is costly in and of itself, and then you lose that benefit, which I think right now it's used at least three nights a week and Sundays for a senior league. So repurpose. Multi-purpose, I think, is an outstanding idea. Can you, and I know pickleball and tennis players sometimes are like farmers and ranchers. But clearly, there should be a way to share space between the two, because pickleball is gaining in popularity incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because the game requires less physical intensity than tennis. And as you have an aging population, that becomes more appealing, and you have tennis players actually converting into pickleball players. So that is a trend, I think, that will only continue to grow. And so how do we figure out how to, and maybe it's pickleball, basketball, right? I mean, just creativity, I think, is something that we really should strive for, because I think we think of ourselves as creative, but sometimes we don't come up with creative solutions for infrastructure and the city. So I think out-of-the-box thinking would, at least throwing those ideas on the table, I think is would be a positive thing to do. Collaboration with other organizations, that, boy, we sure seems like there's got to be a way to figure that out, because it's such a, it's an underutilized facilities for the education organizations, and it's a cost, and having help with those costs, and allowing some level of public access, especially the theaters, given they tend to be occupied for blocks of time while a show is running or rehearsing, but then they're empty a vast majority of the time. And there's theaters at the high schools and at De Anza College, as well as pools at all those facilities as well. So how to develop a win-win and come up with something that will appeal, that will get through any liability concerns and all the other things that tend to go with trying to share a resource, would be fantastic, because it's just it's sad that we can't figure that one out. So those are my main. So nothing really controversial or different from what you've heard or what I think others have stated at this point in time. But it's a good plan.
Thank you.
I was going to say, I like Commissioner Takahashi's mixed-use plans. I think those are important. Mixed facilities are important given the usage. It's almost like watching these VTA buses that have nobody in them. It drives me nuts. And now they darken the windows so you can't tell there's nobody in them. I'm like, that's great. But anyways, okay, a couple things. I actually think that what might help these projects take shape is really having business plans behind each of them, right? That account for costs and other things, like where impact fees might come into place. And I think it'd be really important because, Interim Manager Schwartz, Manager Seeds, these are 20-year plans, right? That's the intention here, right? And it's something we can work off of. And I think for anyone to be able to take action on these, it's going to be important for them to have a business plan to understand which could be funded, and which ones get funded first might be the ones that help with your prioritization, right? And that's a combination of thinking about where impact fees might play a role. So I think that's probably something we should take back, is really starting to help people think what those business plans could be, or have people volunteer business plans on them, especially when we're thinking about private-public partnerships on those on the PPP side. The other piece is, when I was going through the survey and all the survey data, the two most popular items, it seemed, and maybe it's a distortion in the data that I have or what was seen at the moment, were the aquatic center and a fitness center. Is that what you're getting the sense as well? Like those are the two most popular ones? Take the funding piece aside, but they seem to garner a lot of interest.
Yeah, there are a surprising number of swimmers in this town. Swimming is a top 10 activity in our responses in our second questionnaire. Very popular. People are finding a way to swim. And we also have lots of interest in indoor court sports, particularly basketball, also badminton, volleyball. And our city doesn't have a full-size indoor court of any sort. The schools do, and other places do. So partnerships once again, but there's is a possibility. But there's interest out there. There's demand. There's unmet demand from what we're hearing.
It seems like massive community support. I know most people are at DACA doing their swim lessons. I used to see a lot of my neighbors there. People I didn't even know were my neighbors. And we've also have a pool that's poorly managed at the moment, Rancho Rincon, the Rancho pool, that needs a lot of work. It's not poorly managed? Okay, we'll find out. So, But I think there's ways to actually use that facility because it is underutilized as well. Maybe a way to actually kind of connect with them. So I know it's a special district with its special things, but seems to be a place where you can do a partnership in that area. So as well. But anyways, yeah, I think those two items, the aquatics center and the fitness center, are two really big important areas.
So we got a number of comments. The first one, really surprising to me, was that you had an appendix that was only people asking for pickleball. Did you manage to catch a pickleball convention or something for that?
We have provided all the input we received. We got a stack of these input cards after the input process was nominally over, but we always accept input no matter how we get it. We want you to be aware of it. And one day, a group of enthusiastic players stopped by at Quinlan. It was April 30th, and they left a stack of these comment cards showing that they'd love to have pickleball availability here, that they have to leave town to go play. No,
I thought it was funny. If you were just to do that at a glance in the appendices, you would say the top priority here is a pickleball stadium. So I also had a question. This is kind of the pollinator pathways. There was a map in the appendix. It is an unusual map because it showed most of the pathways being along arterial roads in the city. And I was just curious, I probably should, I didn't get a chance to dig deeply into the main document, but I'm curious why that is.
That was a recommendation from the consultant team, and they are looking to identify opportunities. And it's pretty clear that in our park space, we've got Linda Vista Park, we've got lovely places where we could do plantings that are habitat friendly and pollinator friendly. Creek corridors are pretty obvious, but I think one of their points is that folks don't think of our street right-of-way as an opportunity. And because streets go long distances, especially the arterials and the major streets, that if there is plantable space, it's an opportunity to provide plantings that could support a whole range of pollinators, not just bees, and to be mindful of that opportunity. And some of them may work, some of them may really not be feasible, but they put that out there. And some places like Berkeley and some other towns have really been looking at what they can do with their medians and their parkway strips that's property that the city owns and manages. Can we make those better pathways for pollinators and for wildlife in some fashion, whatever it is?
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'll certainly look into it further. That did seem like an unusual recommendation because, those are also the, walkability corridors. Then there's the, unfortunately it may upset the, pollinators, but, that's just a comment there. And then I had a kind of an extended comment. I think I touched on most of the points where the maps in there, D3 through D5, there's a lot of interesting information there, but you really have to know a lot about the city to be able to really understand. So I think that perhaps having a map about, it's hard even to say, having one that reflects the general style of land use is an interesting map independent, so that there's a sense of where are the multifamily dwellings. Now, the interesting question there is that, of course, we're more likely to have a private pool or to have, those sorts of facilities. So I don't know if there's any reasonable way to try to measure that. But to have a sense there, the problem is, and I think that came up pretty clearly, there's a sense that there's a reflection of how well that population is served by geography, and that it's a little swayed because of things like, private spaces and things like that. Even better example, Oak Valley, would probably show up as it's a little tiny strip of land right next to an enormous open space. But if you exclude the accessible open space, then that would actually, be a highly underserved area, and
yes.
And it's not. So I think some work there would be interesting. Commissioner Moore mentioned asked about the blue pheasant, and you know, since I have a lot of history with this project, you know, one of the early thrusts of the plan really was to kind of coordinate. It was to help. How do I want to say this? Before the next generation of the Stevens Creek corridor project, having a master plan that covered the entire city help balance the spending there versus, you know, the spending priorities there versus elsewhere. And one of the areas that was in particular issue there was the consideration of redoing the golf course in some way, Blackberry Farm Golf Course in some way, and then changing the Blue Pheasant physical structure into a city structure, you know, whether it was a place you go, you know, a restaurant or, you know, a pro shop. Those were the kinds of things, the kind of discussion. So on one hand, I think that there's great value in having a citywide view to try to understand the spending. On the other hand, I think it's unfortunate. I believe that at the time when we were talking about this, was right when I was leaving the Parks and Rec Commission, it was something on the order of $20,000 or $25,000 a month of subsidy going into the golf course. So, you know, in the years since, there's really a significant number of dollars that are being lost there by, you know, not having pursued the irrigation fixes and things like that. So I hope that that's something that could get unstuck quickly, and I worry a little that, you know, the discussion around equity, you know, that hopefully we can weigh that with things like, you know, not throwing literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in operating costs, you know, away, and maybe try to get that addressed. Of course, the best thing to do to get the Stevens Creek restoration plan going, you know, kind of master plan going again, is to finish the citywide master plan. So you know, that part's good. I definitely think, again, looking at the evolution of this project, I don't think I would have expected connectivity and non-park areas to have been the highest priority, but I think that repeatedly was coming in as a very high priority, certainly in the public outreach. Sometimes it's easier for a single, more defined item like an aquatic center to get more dots on those boards, but there was always a very, very strong push for trails and connecting spaces between the parks. So I hope that that's something, an important message that can come forward from this, to make sure that those are not overlooked. And as Commissioner Takahashi mentioned, that has been very controversial. Hopefully this can help provide understanding of where, you know, the mind of the community is on the importance of those things. I would also, one of my personal interests back in those days, in the early days, was something that has survived through all these times, and that was to focus on sustainability and you know, ecologic efficiency of the parks. If those 7 items aren't ranked, then I would encourage you to move sustainability higher.
Okay.
The other guys shouldn't mind. I think in particular, one of the things that it's not visible enough to the community is there's a lot of really great people in both Parks and Rec Department and in Public Works who really can make an enormous contribution to moving the parks toward being, you know, better, more sustainable, you know, more enjoyable across the board. And that's actually low-hanging fruit. So even if there's no priorities, I would actually give it a little bit more priority than it got here. I think that, again, one of the really important ideas early on was having nature play, instead of spending $100,000 on the next blue play structure. Maybe the next ones will look different. You had some really great information here tonight about some of the successes at McClellan Ranch. I would make a much bigger deal about that, about, you know, hey, there are butterflies here that wouldn't have been if it hadn't been for the investment in creating the riparian space. Those things I think are really, really, really important. Having, you know, kind of nature play, natural vegetation. I'm not sure that people necessarily understand what that means. It's really important. If you can have a little corner of scary forest in your neighborhood park, that's really great. It doesn't mean a big fiberglass acorn, right? Which sometimes, some places it is a big fiberglass acorn, right? So as long as people understand that, you know, you're not spending the money on, you know, on a brown plate structure instead of a blue one, right? Major facilities, well, it's a tough one here. I actually think one of the things that came up, aquatics and basketball. Basketball comes up both as an indoor and outdoor activity. I think one of the things that's really important with the major facilities and the major expenditures are to put a straw man out about what your money gets and what it would look like. I think that there's a little less of that. There's a sense here that says, well, you know, an aquatic center would have, you know, these kind of features and then this kind of price, but maybe a little more of a flavor. How much does something like what the Y has cost, or how much does something bigger than that? And I think that throwing that stake in the ground will help people prioritize. I actually expected that to be very, very high in the beginning. It may actually be lower. It may be something that people would push out in terms of, you know, they would rather focus on connectivity, rather focus on getting more parkland available. But I think the first and most important part is to get everybody talking about the same thing, or at least, you know, even if they're arguing about it, to try to find the right thing to be trying to build. And then that's when you can start setting aside the money and looking for the space to put it. Equity and parkland dedication was one that came up very strongly as the comments that had come previously from the Planning Commission. You know, there's reconsideration coming here about the parkland dedication program, and so one of the things that happens, and this is again one of these, sometimes people may be misinterpreting what some of these laws mean. You know, in the Quimby Act, one of the things that happens is that there is a clause which generally would favor localizing the parkland dedication to a new development, you know, so as to serve the people who live there. In the case of Cupertino, as that policy, as that policy is reexamined, you may actually want to consider not doing that, so that development projects that happen around the city, you know, if somebody happens to build something new, you know, we're going to, at some point here, going to hear about a planned development out on the foothill, right? It probably, you know, the Quimby Act would normally say, hey, if there's a parkland dedication that happens, it needs to happen in that location, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe that's not the priority. So to have an ability to have that discussion is an important thing. Now, of course, there's going to be the danger that says, okay, well, now somebody's going to build a major project in Rancho Rinconada and they want to put the park somewhere else. You know, so yeah, there's definitely a balance there. You want to try to maintain that. But I think that recognizing the issues that we have here, the master plan is a good way to help try to understand, you know, how to direct those dollars. I spoke before about major infrastructure, minor infrastructure. There were some of the kinds of things we talked about before, having kind of performance areas in the parks, maybe even doing things like building that out so that, you know, so you have speakers and things like that there, so that it's less of a challenge to come out and have movie night there. You know, hopefully those things will happen as well. And that actually comes to my next point, almost last point here, which is about prioritization. I think that there's been a very conscious effort, and I understand. I think that that's good, to not try to prioritize. You know, to identify the things we're talking about and not prioritize them too much. But as I had mentioned before, often having a straw man, a strong straw man, for people to understand what is it that we're thinking about spending money on, will really help. Will really help focus and help people, you know, speak more clearly about their priorities. And so in that respect, some prioritization, some things that you favor. You had a slide in there which talked about opportunities, you know, near-term opportunities. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with that specific list, but trying to have that in mind, you know, in the big framework, there are many things we want to try to work on. A little more refinement helps make for better discussion. And to kind of being able to whip out the list of, well, these are the things we think are the top priorities, and have that be something that is visible and refined over time, I think would be a really valuable complement to the material in the master plan.
We agree, and the prioritization and specific plans will be the next steps after the master plan is adopted
Yeah.
formally by council.
That's it. Thank
Anyone
you.
else? Thank you.
With regards to prioritization, I'd actually like to see that one portion come back as a study session to go over, and because of the word equity showed up on so many slides, I'd actually prefer to see it in the mission vision statement. And there was and we need to have some kind of metric to let us know when we've made progress with regards to equity. There was a statement saying developers should be required to dedicate parkland in park deficient areas. I would actually like to see the words should strike it and change it to shall. Developers shall be required to dedicate parkland in park deficient areas. And then that brings up the question of needing a solid metric, and are you going to be using census tracts and park acreage, and how are you going to create some metrics to decide who needs to dedicate the parkland? How are you going to do that? And I do have a question. I had heard that Luther School was building a cricket field. Is that something that you're aware of?
That I don't know. I know of a number of the cricket fields in our region, but Luther, I'll look into that. We'll follow up.
Do any of the other commissioners know about
Luther
this?
is in Santa Clara, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. And I do want to bring up something with our field use policy, which I don't think it's addressed here, but a number of years ago, the field use policy changed so that you could permit the fields if you had less than 50% residency. And I know you brought up that we use some of the school sites for soccer, and there's been a request during the past year for both cricket and soccer to have Sunday play. And that has been a big concern of mine because I live on the east side, and if these fields are, we have the school field, which you demonstrated doesn't really have access to the community all the time, and then you also have Creekside Park, which is permitted out throughout the entire year.
Yeah.
So if you eliminate Sunday, also that means that park deficient area now doesn't have the field at all during the week. So that's something that is supposed to be coming on the agenda for, I guess, Parks and Rec next year. So if there's some way that to inform the public about these areas in the city that have a shortage of parkland, plus the field use being permitted, that I think that would help for general information, so that, because it sounds great when the kids come and say, I really want the Sunday field time, but when you're looking at a league that only has 22 or 23% residency and giving away that Sunday field time, it doesn't seem particularly fair. So
would an alternative to that be just weigh the park location in that decision? In other words, if there's more parks, say on the west side, that you would permit that to the west side or something along those lines. That's what it sounded like.
That would help.
Okay.
But Creekside is for a grass field. It is one of the best.
Yeah, it's a very nice grass
and
field. It is.
Right.
Yeah.
Nothing beats real grass. Really doesn't. Okay. Hey, we're going to turn over to any public comments. Before that, I just wanted to leave a final thing. I think form follows function. The programming activities that people are looking for probably would dictate what kind of facilities we need going forward. Just don't forget that. Form's important. And as you can tell, the form does change over time. There's some things that are timeless, some things that are fads that will be there. And I really like Commissioner Takahashi's point on the multi-use, because I think that's going to help you with these facilities as they change in fads. With that, let's open up to public comment. Jennifer Griffin. Anybody else with cards, feel free to jump in. Fill a card. Thanks.
Good evening, Planning Commission. I hope you can hear me.
Got this.
I just wanted to make a
Thanks.
few comments. Some of them talk about issues in the east side. Some of them concern Apple. I don't know if you all are aware, but there was a loss of a major parkland along the Calabasas Creek corridor before Apple purchased the Apple II off-campus lands in multiple purchases, as Steve had said at the city council meeting, we had anticipated that the frontage of Calabasas from Valco Parkway out to Tantau,
Tantau.
would be public park for Cupertino. I don't know if people remember that, but that was land. I would consider it potential. It was lost. Apple has it now, which is great, but it is banked for the future. Maybe someday we can have that. When we were planning Main Street, we were at the process of thinking, before we knew Apple had bought the land, that that would be a city corridor for Cupertino. At this point, the money from Apple is there for the purchase of Lawrence Mitty, $10 million. It is being held for the acquisition. It is complicated. I believe that the Apple donation money cannot be used for anything else. It is to be used for the purchase of the Lawrence Mitty property. Apple has to deliver a 1-acre park to Cupertino because there was a park that was entitled at the time that Apple purchased a parkland that was on Prune Ridge and Tantau. That runs with the land. The 1-acre park is to be given to Cupertino. My understanding is that the 10 million was part, you're correct, 10 million for 1-acre land, might even be 14 million. But that is what was given by Apple, and the future prospect was the purchase of the Lawrence Mitty property. Now, I'm going to say, the city cannot seize the Rancho Rinconada Swim Center without giving us the Lawrence Mitty Park. What you're trying to do is take away any other parkland that Rancho has. And I will say right now that I think that there has to be a better use of aquatics at Blackberry Farm. They need to put an aquatic center at Blackberry Farm for the amount of money that has been spent on Blackberry Farm, on the west side, on the Mount Vista side. Over the years since we have been annexed to us from the east side, I have seen millions of dollars pumped into Blackberry Farm. You have the pools there. I went there as a child. Build the aquatic center there. If you're having problems with access, build a road straight up from Stevens Creek Boulevard into Blackberry Farm. Don't perpetuate the problem to the east side. We have no parking. My taxes go to support the Rancho Rinconada Swim Center. It is complicated. It is as complicated as the purchase of the Lawrence Mitty property, and nobody can gloss over that. I know the history of the Lawrence Mitty property very, very deeply. I know all the parties that are involved in it. It will happen someday, but it is as complicated as it gets. And this is what I'm saying. I think that the aquatic center should be at Blackberry Farm. I resent the fact that all this money is being used at Blackberry Farm. All the money is being pumped there, and you need an aquatic center. Equity is equity. I'm saying I don't know if it's the greatest thing in the world, but put the aquatic center there and build a road. When I went there as a kid on a bus,
Jennifer,
we went up a road from Stevens Creek Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you. We're out of time. Okay, with that, I think we're good. Any other questions? I do think it's important if we can look into that history on the Apple side. Just direct staff to take a look at that and see what the commitments were. Maybe we can accelerate some of the purchases or remind council that that's there. We've got a resident historian in the room. So thank you.
I had attended a county supervisors meeting, and they mentioned the situation with the board for Rancho Rinconada, and I guess it would be city council, but I would like us to have an update on what's going on with the board issue. It seemed as though they were down to only 2 board members, something like that.
I was also at many of those meetings at the Rancho Pool, and apparently 2 of the board members do not live in the district. There's been some complicated issues there. One board member was forced out, even though she was uncovering a lot of the inconsistencies over there.
It has been resolved.
It's been resolved? Okay, so we can get an update. Okay, thank you.
And I'd also like it to be clarified whether or not the city does have some intention to purchase the Rancho Rinconada pool, as was mentioned. I think people would like to know that if that's really, transparently, is that the intention? Because I did not get that sense reading the Parks and Recreation Master Plan that was in the works, but perhaps it was and I just missed it.
So it's the city's intention on that is not in the master plan at this point. That is not an agenda item, so I'd say let's agendize that for a future meeting. I don't think we should be having that discussion about Rancho at this meeting at this time.
No, I agree with that. Okay, with that, I think we have no new business.
I'm sorry, if I can just add, I'd like to just thank you for all the comments. The number of comments, the depth of the comments is amazing, and I really appreciate that. And I'd also like to congratulate Gail on an amazing document. I've been in this business now for 36, 37 years, and I've seen some of the master plans that were maybe dozens of pages and really superficial and glossed over things. And this is one of the most detailed plans I've seen. So congratulations to Gail and to the staff that worked on it. But again, thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Well, I'll add, I don't think there's been any document the city's ever done that's had as much public outreach. Maybe it's just because of the time.
No, this is amazing. Thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your presentations.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you for your feedback. It is greatly appreciated. And thank you especially for sacrificing an evening when you could have been elsewhere and attending a special meeting and sharing your ideas with us. I can't tell you how much that means. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your work. All right, you may notice I've been rushing. We are under some time constraints, so if we can quickly see it, I believe there's no other new business. If we can limit staff and commission reports real quick, we do have to vacate this room at a certain period of time.
No staff reports.
Okay, any other reports from commissioners?
I'll blurt out.
Go on.
Just for a minute, I attended a presentation by Transform, which is a nonprofit, urban planning nonprofit, about a project called REX, which is a regional transit proposal. It was interesting. Cupertino is a big part of that. That's it.
Okay, I'll mention one meeting I went to. I attended the Housing Commission on November 14th. There was a presentation by the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley. There is a loan program for a $800,000 loan. They will finance up to 17% of the loan for 30 years. It would be in the agenda packet for the Housing Commission November 14th meeting, and if you know people that are looking to buy in the area, it's a great program. Thank you.
Commissioner Takahashi, you good? Okay. Well, with that, I will conclude the meeting of today's special meeting of the Planning Commission for December 2nd.